Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host Joel Dehls. This is episode 11 of the Fantasy Reaction Show. We are here after Monday Night Football to watch the Packers and the Raiders.
What a
And
game.
my goodness gracious, that game was poop. A lot of terrible football played. Before we get into that, Mr. Dehls, how are you doing today, sir?
I'll tell you what, man. The only reason I was really locked into this game was because of fantasy football. That's the only reason I had to watch these two mid-ass teams, these two mid-ass quarterbacks with these two mid-ass offenses. It's the only reason I watched. Fantasy gives, fantasy takes. Last week, I'm up 40 going into Monday Night Football, going up against Daniel Jones and the Seahawks defense. I'm thinking I'm fine. 40 points, like, even if Daniel goes crazy, goes off for 30, the defense is going to struggle. It's going to have 2 or 3 points. What happens? Seattle has a franchise record 11 sacks, and they put up like 38, and Daniel Jones puts up like 6, and they win. Or excuse me, I lose my matchup. My
Uh-huh.
opponent wins. And then tonight, I'm up 14 with AJ Dillon. Supposed to have Aaron Jones. He's out. Picked up AJ Dillon. My opponent has Josh Jacobs and Jordan Love. I'm up 14. The whole day, I'm like, oh, I'm beat. I know there's not a chance in God's name I win this game. And that's the reason I watched this game, because the first quarter went, I got a chance. Second quarter went, AJ Dillon scored that touchdown. I'm like, I am right in this. And shout out Jordan Love, 3 interceptions. He ended up having like 6 points. Josh Jacobs had a decent day, but I don't know, like 9, 10 points, something like that. Ended up pulling off the victory. Everyone in our league, this is our main league, me and Drew do every year, a big money league. Everyone is either 3-2 or 2-3. Nobody in our league has this like super overwhelming or super terrible team. Everyone is bunched up. So this one was just so big.
Yeah, and I kind of had a situation where, remember in the beginning of the season, I think it was after week 3, if you're 0-3, don't panic. We've seen some crazy turnarounds. Like I said, I was 0-3, and here we are 2 weeks later, and your boy's in the mix, 2-3. I'm Dak Prescott away from being good and being one of the best teams in this league. If Dak Prescott wasn't a pile of shit, we would be in some money. That team is great. It's just being held back by Dak Prescott, unfortunately. But let's talk about this game. You mentioned it. Jordan Love had himself a horrendous performance on Monday Night Football. These last 2 weeks, we've seen him on Primetime. He has not played well, not even a little bit. We saw a little flash in the second half versus the Lions, but that was really just a big comeback from behind type of game, type script. They were going to pass the ball. He was going to end up having some good fantasy numbers. But today, horrendous. 16 for 30, 182 yards, 3 INTs with a chance to win the game also. Goes and throws an interception. He had Christian Watson. If he just throws it off rip, that was a touchdown. He underthrows it, doesn't give Christian Watson not even a chance to make a play on the ball. Ends up getting intercepted to end the game. But Jordan Love was supposed to eat this matchup. He's been phenomenal in fantasy football. Now, we are a fantasy sports podcast, so let's keep it separate from football. In fantasy football, he's been excellent prior to today's stinker. He was, in a lot of leagues, a top 5 quarterback. He was quarterback 3, quarterback 6 couple of weeks, and then quarterback 16 and quarterback 12. Quarterback 16 being his worst. Now this week against the Raiders finishes as quarterback 24. Not what you want to see from Jordan Love. This was one of my best plays of the week too. The matchup was there for him. He simply just folded under the bright lights. Mr. Dehls, is this the beginning of the end of the Jordan Love show?
I was wondering the same thing. So I'm looking at the schedule. They got a bye week, but then they get Denver. And then they get the Vikings, the Rams, Pittsburgh, Chargers, Detroit. So I'm looking at this upcoming schedule, and especially these next 2 weeks after the bye, when you're getting the Broncos and the Vikings, it doesn't get better than that. So Jordan Love, in one quarterback leagues, there's a good chance Jordan Love gets dropped, especially after the bye week. So look ahead a couple of weeks if you do have a roster spot to burn. Maybe you have a quarterback going on bye. That Denver matchup, I got no problem starting Jordan Love. I think we knew that it wasn't going to be forever that Jordan Love was going to play at this top 5 fantasy level, right? He had the first 2 games of the season. He has 3 passing touchdowns, and he's only completing 14, 15 passes. The next 2 weeks, not great, but he has a couple rushing touchdowns in there that kind of makes him fantasy relevant. This game, though, against Vegas, who has quietly been pretty good against fantasy quarterbacks, like they're within the top 10 or 15, at least going into this week. I know we typically think of the Raiders as one of the worst defenses in the league, and they're still, on paper, total stats wise, not great, but at least for fantasy, they've been decent. But you go in, complete 50% of your passes, 180 yards, 3 interceptions, a 32 passer rating. I mean, this is just another game of Jordan Love completing like 50% of his passes, 55%. I don't have it, his numbers aren't updated, but coming into the game, he was completing less than 60% of his passes. And it's a small sample size, right? We're 5 weeks into, really 5 weeks into his career. I know he had to cut a couple starts here and there the last couple of seasons, but 5 weeks, a couple of tough opponents, a couple of easier opponents, and he's not been accurate. Like, I think that's just it's very obvious to me. And a couple of the interceptions he had this game, I mean, the first one was terrible. He threw it right to the linebacker. The second interception, the receiver was covered. It was a good play by the DB. It almost might have been a linebacker playing coverage, made a good play. And that last interception, Watson had to step on him, but the time he had to step on him, it was too late to throw the ball. He would have had to throw that with anticipation, because even the commentator said it, that if Watson keeps running at full speed, he's going to run out of the back of the end zone. There just wasn't enough room. So he had to underthrow it, kind of a 50-50 jump ball. The DB been a nice play on it. But so far through 5 weeks, the most staggering thing is his inaccuracy. And young quarterback, young position groups. You have Christian Watson year 2, Musgrave year 1, Romeo Doubs year 2, Reed year 1. So this offense was going to have growing pains. I think we should have expected that. We did expect that. But I don't think any of us were expecting Jordan Love to be one of, if not the most inaccurate quarterback in the NFL.
You mentioned it, a bye week. You get Aaron Jones back into this lineup as well, on top of having a solid schedule coming off the bye. You mentioned Denver, Minnesota. They have the Rams after that also, who are not the best of secondaries at all. There is still time for Jordan Love to continue to be fantasy relevant. I think with getting Aaron Jones back, which is what a lot of fans were anticipating, Aaron Jones make his return today, but it makes sense why they decided to hold him out. You wait one more week, get him after the bye. Hopefully you get him for the rest of the season. I still feel confident in Jordan Love, the fantasy football player. He's been pretty solid, but like you mentioned, he seemed a little erratic today, a little too much happy feet, just not clean. He has not been accurate a majority of the season, but because he's been so efficient in terms of scoring touchdowns, both as a passer and a rusher, it gets overlooked, particularly in fantasy football. But when stuff like that's not hitting, and of course he's making terrible decision after terrible decision, those 3 INTs, none of them you could have even been like a question, had a little hesitant eyes out on Jordan. All of them were bad passes. All of them, you look at Jordan and think, what were you doing there? But again, with the schedule, how lenient it is, Aaron Jones coming back off the bye, there is optimism to be had with Jordan Love. He gets that safety blanket back. Hopefully that allows him to be a little bit more at ease. We saw Aaron Jones week 1 against the Bears, albeit it is the Bears. He was unbelievable, and Jordan Love was able to put up some high-level fantasy production. Let's talk about Green Bay real quick, and then we'll go over to the other side. You mentioned A.J. Dillon, who we've been adamant is not a good rusher, was kind of on display today. There was really no aspect of high-level football on either side for the majority. A.J. Dillon, 20 carries, 76 yards, was able to get into the end zone, save face on a fantasy perspective, around 14 fantasy points. Christian Watson, another one, 3 catches, 3 catches on 7 targets, was able to accrue 91 yards because of that big play. Did get robbed of a touchdown because of a pretty dirty play by Marcus Peters grabbing the horse collar. In hindsight, if you're a gamer and you're trying to win a game, Marcus Peters really made a very game-saving play where they weren't able to get into the end zone, and they were able to come away with the victory with 4 points instead of allowing them to get into the end zone, of course. But Christian Watson, of course, I think you have to continue to put faith in him. He's a big play type of receiver. He shows that he can get open. It's just going to be a matter of Jordan Love, whether he can hit him or not. I still have faith in him. This was a surprise for me. Romeo Doubs, 1 catch on 4 targets, only for 4 yards. He has been pretty damn consistent throughout the start of this season. he goes against Chicago, was wide receiver 10. Against New Orleans in week 3, wide receiver 13. Against Detroit, wide receiver 14. Today, wide receiver 100, almost put up a goose.
0.9 points.
So to me, that's pretty surprising. It's just due to the fact of this offense was ineffective. It was inefficient. It was not good. I think there's better weeks to come. I'm not going to over scrutinize these 2 wide receivers, especially talking about Romeo, who has been a pretty consistent option for Jordan Love so far into the season, but not an overall great performance from the Packers. To talk about the Raiders, Jimmy G just continues to do a job, wins this game. He didn't make too many mistakes, did have that INT, but 22 for 31, 208 yards and a touchdown to Jacoby, did have that interception. Josh Jacobs, this is the guy that I want to talk about primarily on this Raiders offense, because we saw him struggle the first 2 weeks, back-to-back weeks, ends up putting solid fantasy performances forward, was running back 5 last week, was running back 6 this week, and he got into the end zone. Also, on top of it, he has been a PPR machine. Had 5 catches on 5 targets for 20 yards, nothing crazy there, but he continues to get that volume. If you have him in a PPR league prior to this week, maybe it's the same, not too sure as of right now. Got to wait till the numbers update, but he was leading the league at the running back position in receiving yards with Christian McCaffrey. So when you're in that category, specifically as a receiving back, that is excellent company. He has been one of Jimmy G's greatest friends. He's the safety blanket for Jimmy G. Whenever he's in trouble, he dishes it off to Josh Jacobs. If you're in a PPR league, are you feeling confident going forward with Josh Jacobs that this is the production?
I still think he still feels touchdown dependent. And I almost feel biased because I've never been the biggest Josh Jacobs fan. So when he went out last year and put up the RB1 season and everyone was going crazy, and I almost didn't want to believe it just because of my prior belief on Josh Jacobs. He's not the most explosive guy. He had the longest rush of the season so far was 24 yards. So it's not like he's the type of running back that's going to be able to break off the 60, 70-yard run. So he's the type that is going to get the 20 carries, the 17 carries he got the prior week. He's going to be up in the league leaders in terms of touches per game. But you're going to need that touchdown still in order for him to be a top 5, top 10 running back. Like you mentioned, though, in the receiving department, 5 receptions for 20 yards, that's going to be able to save face a lot of weeks because overall, this Raiders offense is probably not going to be the most consistent. It's not going to have the most red zone trips. It's not going to score a ton of touchdowns. So you do need those between the 20s dump offs. He had one even in the last drive of this game where it was just he was lined up in the slot over the middle. He got a first down and a catch. That's 1.5 points or 2 points in full PPR. Those are the type of plays you're going to need from Josh Jacobs. Not that last season was a flash in the pan or that he can't do that again. I just don't know if he's going to score as many touchdowns as he did last year or be more efficient because so far through the first 5 weeks of this season, I haven't been blown away. He averaged 3.5 yards per carry. I'm not sure if in any game he's averaged more than 4 yards per carry. I was just looking at the numbers earlier. But the one player I actually did want to talk about on Vegas is someone who I've been high on. Jacobs has not averaged 4 yards carry in any game.
Nope.
Jacoby Myers is must start. Outside of the game with Aiden O'Connell, he has gotten at least 10 targets when Jimmy G starts. He got a touchdown. He's gotten a touchdown earlier in the season. He has at least 2, might even have 3. Out-targeted Devontae Adams. Tay is dealing with the shoulder injury. Tay is going to get back to his normal self. But
for sure,
right now, Jacoby Myers is an absolute must-start. 7 for 75, 10 targets, got the touchdown. He's someone that, I mean, it almost feels Robert Woods-esque, like when he was in LA, where he's not going to burn you over the top. He's not going to have these big explosive plays. But if he's going to get double-digit targets and he's going to be able to put 7 for 70, if he finds an end zone, he's going to be a top 15 receiver. And he's done that 3 of the 4 weeks he's been healthy this year.
I was going to say he's had 2 weeks so far where he's been top 10. Jacoby is getting fed the ball very consistently. That's Jimmy's game, and that's Jacoby's game, that intermediate. And Jacoby lives there, and he thrives in that. And when he's getting to the end zone, he's going to have an excellent fantasy football week. I anticipated that with the injury, Devontae Adams was not going to be as dominant, of course, as we've seen him early on so far in this season. This was by far his worst performance, and that was also due to having the shoulder injury. He was mostly a decoy. When they needed a play, they would go to Tay, but very limited, only 4 catches, but he did bring in all 4 targets. But this was Jacoby Myers' game. Of course, he's going to continue to be a dog. I'm just going to backpack off what you're saying. With Jimmy G, loving what he's seeing right now. And like I said already, with the 2 skill types, they mesh perfectly for one another. I'm with you. He is a must start going forward. Let's not talk too much about Tay. I think he's going to be fine. This
Yeah,
is
he's
one of
fine.
those, the first week off the AC injury. The fact that he played at all was pretty crazy, but that's just Tay. He's going to go out there if he can, and really just was able to draw attention to himself, because you always have to be mindful of Devontae Adams. Now,
Yeah, and you
let's
saw it when you could
go
tell,
ahead.
sorry, you could tell he wasn't 100% because he was very Tyler Lockett-esque. When he got the ball, he went down. Like, he
Yep,
got the ball, was on the 2-yard line. If Tay's 100% healthy, he's putting his helmet
lowering
down
the
and getting in the
shoulder
end
for
zone.
sure.
Exactly, but you saw him down to 2. Once he went down, I was like, oh, yeah, he's not himself.
No way. So let's do it. Let's get into the quarterback studs of week 5. Quarterback 1, we spoke about it on Thursday. Didn't change today. Justin Fields finishes the week at quarterback 1. Was fantastic. Are we agreeing in agreement? Is this what you are going to expect going forward? Are we finally seeing the awakening of Justin Fields?
Not only should we expect this going forward, but Minnesota next week, Raiders, Chargers the next 3 weeks,
The
fire him
schedule is
up.
insane. The schedule is insane. Quarterback 2, Mr. Consistent, Mr. Relevant, Brock Purdy had himself a ball game, 252 yards, 4 touchdowns against one of the better defenses in the league. He was phenomenal. Of course, Goff, Josh Allen had themselves some ball games. Jalen Hurts continues to be one of the best fantasy quarterbacks, just so long as the tush push does not get banned.
He
NFL,
got a 2-yard tush push this week.
I
Or
mean,
is this the 1 yard ago?
they're never
Did you
not
did
gonna,
you see that the
they went
last
for it.
drive of the first half?
Yes, I
They
did.
got the ball in like their 30 with 17 seconds left, and they end up getting a touchdown. Fucking insane.
The offense was unbelievable this week for sure. Now, finally, we've been waiting on this guy all season long. He said that this is the most healthy that he's felt all season long. Your guy, Mr. ISO Joe
Your
Burrow.
guy's crazy.
Bro, what do you
It had
mean?
to
You
be
took
this
him over
year.
Lamar
I
Jackson.
know, I
This
know, I
has to
know.
be your guy. Goes for 317, 3 touchdowns. He did have an INT, but this was everything that you've been waiting for. If you are a Joe Burrow owner, he lit up the Cardinals. Of course, there was still concern whether or not he was 100%, but he seen himself. The big plays were coming time after time. They were clicking on all cylinders. Of course, we're going to talk about Jamar Chase a little bit later in the show, but you have to feel amazing if you're a Joe Burrow owner. Finally, this is what you've been waiting for.
And put away the numbers, put away the big plays. You watched him play, moving in and out of the pocket, evading sacks. He had his. There's only been 2 times this year where Joe Burrow has rushed for more than 1 yard on a play. One of them was this game. I mean, he looked basically like Joe Burrow did. I don't know how he did this complete 180 in a matter of a week. Where last week we're looking at him like, bro, this doesn't even look close. Doesn't even resemble last year's team or 2 years
Yep.
ago. And within the matter of 1 week, going up against Arizona, he looked like vintage Joe Burrow. I mean, there's one play where he does like a 360, able to evade a sack,
Yep.
checks it down to the running back. You're like, holy shit! Like his calf doesn't even look like it's bothering him one bit. So going forward, I mean, don't just look at the box score and be like, oh, maybe a broken play here or there. Joe Burrow looked just like Joe Burrow has in previous years. So I'm back to expecting him to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback going forward.
I'm with you 100%. When Joe Burrow is healthy, he's one of the best in the game. And he's been one of the best in the game, not only in real life, but in fantasy football. He can give you performances like he did this past weekend. The calf is just limiting the big plays because he can't get outside the pocket. But you saw it this weekend when he's able to get out, big plays do follow. Now, this was a surprise. I don't think anybody saw this. Desmond Ridder cracking the top 10 329 yards, a touchdown, was able to rush for 10 yards and get into the end zone as well. Definitely not what I was anticipating. I had to show him some respect because, as everyone knows, I'm very critical of Desmond. But hey, a gamer can respect another one. Unbelievable performance from Desmond. I'm not anticipating this going forward, but if you can continue to aid Kyle Pitts into having a good fantasy football week, to aid Drake London into having some success, I would very much appreciate it. Sam Howell
He
had
does have
himself a great.
Washington next week. Ritter
Of
does have
course,
Washington, who have been terrible.
they've been horrendous. That being
Yeah.
said, you cannot trust the
No,
consistency
100%,
of
100%.
a Desmond Ritter. Sam Howell, we talked about on Thursday. He had himself a great fantasy day. Mahomes is going to be Mahomes to round out the top 10. But Bryce Young, the last name I do want to mention, did struggle a little bit to start this game, had some bad interceptions, but was able to be fantasy relevant. 23 fantasy points, did end the game with 3 touchdowns, did throw 2 interceptions early on, but this was finally his first time getting into the top 10, but also kind of just his first time putting together good statistics, even though the 2 INTs weren't great to see.
Yeah, it was a lot of garbage time.
It was.
So like you fantasy, who gives a shit?
That's
The
all I'm
points are the
saying.
points, right? Blake Bortles has like a top 7, top 8 fantasy quarterback season off garbage time alone. So
Take me
you
back,
take it.
man. Take me
But
back.
it it's it didn't feel like, at least to me, that the Panthers or Bryce Young turned a corner. It was just the Lions were killing them, and they're like, okay, like we're gonna play, back. We're not gonna let you get over the top. And Bryce Young was able to kind of just eat underneath.
I'm with you. Let's get into quarterback duds. A lot of great names here, unfortunately. Let's start off with not a great name, Zach Wilson. Listen,
Mm,
was able to come away with the W. Credit to him. He made some solid plays. Had that bad interception to Pat Surtain. Don't know why you're throwing it to him in that
bold move.
situation in the first place. But in fantasy football, that's all that matters to us. 7 fantasy points, 19 for 26, 199 yards, no touchdowns, and like I mentioned, an INT. I only mentioned this because there was conversations of him potentially being a start of the week. This Broncos defense is so bad. Zach Wilson could repeat after having a great performance against Kansas City. Just had to acknowledge that. Also, Broncos did lose. It is what it is. You can gloat all you want tomorrow. Getting to the next dud, Dak Prescott. This was the worst performance of the week. To go up against San Francisco, the game was highly anticipated. To throw 3 bad interceptions back to back to back, had that beautiful touchdown. You're starting to feel like they're getting some momentum going when the score is 14-7. Finishes with 6 fantasy points, 14 of 24, 153 yards. This was such a bad showing for Dak Prescott, and he continues to be a bad fantasy quarterback. Has not finished top 15 not once this season. He hasn't had bad matchups either. This was definitely not an easy matchup, but when you are a high caliber team and you're going up against another high caliber defense as well, you were anticipating that a supposed top 10 quarterback in the National Football League is going to step up. Now, we did have our concerns. We've had concerns with Dak Prescott to start this season already on this show, but this is just another performance to continue to not have confidence in Dak going forward.
Yeah, the offense. I mean, I understand week 1 they put up 40, right? But we talked about that. That wasn't really the offense. There was more defense and special teams. Against the
Yep.
Jets, they put up 30, super efficient. But Dak Prescott on the year hasn't thrown for more than 255 passing yards. He's got 5 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. He hasn't finished higher than QB 17 on a week, and that was week 2 against the Jets. Upcoming is the Chargers, week 6. I think that's a great matchup. It should be high scoring. They should be able to or they should be forced to score because I think the Chargers be able to move the ball. So I think you still go out there and start Dak Prescott, but we haven't really seen that ceiling of Dak like we've seen in previous years. I mean, I knew I was lower on the Cowboys offense as a whole coming into this season, but I wasn't expecting this. I was expecting at least a 300-yard game by now, at least one game with 3 touchdowns. And going up against the Niners, you did have to, suppress some of your expectations because Niners defense, top 3 in the league. They've shown week in and week out. It's really just the Rams and the Cardinals to an extent as well that have been able to move the ball against them. But 150 yards, 3 interceptions. I mean, this game was over at the end of the first quarter, I felt like this game was over. Like, it felt like there was no way the Cowboys consistently were able to move the ball. They struggled to run the ball as well. So when you can't run the ball with Pollard effectively, and it's really just CeeDee Lamb out there, realistically, Brandon Cooks has not been able to get anything going. Jake Ferguson is more of an underneath weapon. Michael Gallup is fine, but post ACL surgeries, he's not the same explosive player he used to be. This Cowboys offense right now doesn't look like it's going to, outside of CeeDee Lamb and Pollard, doesn't look like Dak Prescott is going to be able to be super top 10, top 5 type of quarterback that he might have been drafted to be.
Just for reference on how poor Dak has been, right now, I'm going to blind stats. You
Here we
tell me
go.
who you think who is. All right, player one, 1,073 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 INTs. 1,061 yards, passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 4 INTs. Who's who?
Well, I know the 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions is Dak, so I looked at that. The first one's Zach Wilson.
The first one's Desmond Ridder.
Ah, damn it.
That just gives some context into how poor of a passer Dak Prescott has been so far this season, or let me say inefficient in terms of touchdowns, because 5 to start this year, 1 behind Desmond, who we can all come to an agreement and say outside of this game against the Texans has been horrific as a passer. So just a little tidbit there into the woes that are Dak Prescott. And I'm being hard on him because I have him and I need him. And he's been horrendous. And I'm with you. Kellen Moore, he got scapegoated. You were on that very early on. Kellen Moore went over into the Chargers. We're seeing Justin Herbert be fantastic to start the season. We're seeing a complete regression in Dak Prescott, where he was already kind of poor last season. He's been very bad to start this year. The last dud we're going to go over, your guy, Lamar Jackson. And I only bring him up because he only finished with 11 fantasy points. But this wasn't on him.
Like,
right?
yeah.
Like, this is one of those
God.
that I'm trying to right wrongs of those that are going against Lamar Jackson. I'm talking to you, Stephen A. Smith. If you're locked into the Fantasy Reaction Show, irresponsible opinion. You're going to allow a guy to go through 7 drop passes, 2 drop touchdown passes, 1 to Bateman, 1 to Aguilar, and you're going to sit here and say you need to do more? 7 drop passes? He would have finished with a phenomenal stat line if it weren't for these 7 drops and then having to press at the very end of the game, which was unfortunate because Lamar usually does trust his guys to see it at the end, kind of lose that faith. That jump ball, I guess you could say he had confidence in Odell, but that was just such a poor ball. That's the one mistake that I'm looking at Lamar and thinking, what was going on there? What were you processing there? You're going to Odell Beckham at this point where he did leave the game with an injury over a Mark Andrews, who's been one of your most reliable targets for the last couple of years. And to start this season as well, he's been one of the few fantasy relevant tight ends that had been consistent. So that was a pretty big head scratcher. But of course, we trust Lamar Jackson going forward. Did have a fumble. I want to note that he does lead the league in fumbles with 7. One behind him is Trevor Lawrence. Very interesting. But 6 rushes for 45 yards wasn't even that great on the ground. We talk about it when you're Lamar Jackson. These type of numbers are average. You anticipate better games. But I'm not going to look into this one too much. A lot of drop passes that I think the Ravens can clean up. Let's get into running back studs. Travis Etienne, running back 1, and where he's been kind of inconsistent. His great games are great games. His bad games are bad games. Has finished running back 6, running back 9. And again, this week, running back 1. But in between that, has a running back 40 and a running back 22. He was phenomenal against the Bills. Maybe that's something to note where the Bills defense has been destroyed with injuries. But for Etienne to go for 26 times, 136 yards and 2 touchdowns, nevertheless, you love to see that from Etienne. He's going to produce one of the better fantasy seasons at the running back position just for sheer volume alone. But you want to see a little bit more consistency. I just do think this was a great sign for things to come. Now, this guy, I have to include here, sir. I
Almost
know it's
broke
going to
my heart.
pain you, and it pains me because you'd think that we'd be talking about Jonathan Taylor first week back, just got the big contract for 3 years, around 40-some million dollars, and we're here talking about Zach Moss being the running back 2 on the week against the Titans, who are one of the best rush defenses in football. 33 fantasy points, 23 attempts, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns. This was by far, and Jamar went for almost 60 fantasy points in a PPR league. DJ Moore went crazy. This was the most surprising performance this week because against the Titans, 165 rushing, and he looked good. Like, I'm not
He
trying to
did.
say,
He
like,
did.
it wasn't like he had these massive holes. He looked fast. He looked quick. He was getting by guys. And this was one of the best performances that we've seen by a running back, not just this week, but this season period.
Weeks 1 through 4, the Titans allowed 227 total rushing yards and 1 touchdown. And
My
Zach Moss put
God.
up basically 60-70% of those yards and doubled the touchdowns in one game. I'm sure if anyone out there started Zach Moss, hats off to you because I had Zach Moss in our league. And I'll be honest, I didn't think twice about starting Khalil Herbert over him. And Khalil Herbert coming into the week, you're probably looking at him like his RB30, RB35, like a very like if he gets a touchdown, maybe he could be top 20 type of play. So I had no confidence starting Zach Moss. I mean, this is a Titans defense who I don't know, it's over the last like 15 or 20 games, they haven't allowed more than 66 rushing yards to the number one running back on a team. Now Jonathan Taylor's coming back, and you get that report that he's going to be on the snap count, but you know how great Jonathan Taylor is. And you know if he gets going, the snap count's not going to really be a snap count. He's going to get the looks. But now you got Zach Moss going out there, 23 attempts, and I'm sitting here thinking next week I have to start him because I have Aaron Jones on a bye. And I'm already short on running backs with JK going down week 1. So I'm forced to start him. But Jonathan Taylor got his money. This is without a doubt his backfield. There is no world where Zach Moss rest of the season outproduces, outsnaps Jonathan Taylor, even if Zach Moss is more efficient than him. The money says Jonathan Taylor is going to get the ball. So I think at least for a week or two, especially with Anthony Richardson being out, they're going to rely heavily on the run game. I think for a week or two, Zach Moss is probably startable, especially that Jonathan Taylor. I don't know his exact snap percentage, but only got 5 carries, and he
Yep.
turned that into 15, 18 yards. So it's not like he was super efficient. A couple of weeks from now, Jonathan Taylor will eventually take over this backfield. I think if he's 100%, he'll eventually look like vintage Jonathan Taylor. But right now, Zach Moss has been way too good, way too efficient for the Colts to just say, all right, Jonathan Taylor, here's the keys, 95% of snaps. Zach Moss, I think, is going to be relevant going forward, and watch next week him get 6 carries because that's just how fantasy football goes. But it was, like you said, the biggest surprise of this week and really probably the most impressive performance out of any running back this year going up against that stout Titans defense.
I'm not disagreeing at all. You asked about Jonathan Taylor's snap percentage, 15%.
Yeah, he was barely
15%,
out there.
which makes a lot of
So even
sense.
next
Now,
year, if he's up to 30, maybe 35, like Zach Moss still going to get 50+%, and that's going to be more than enough for him to be relevant.
Now, your start of the week, of course, it was an obvious one. Breece Hall finally getting the handcuffs taken off against this Denver defense that if you have a running back going up against Denver, you blindly put him in. Does not matter who it is. He will have success. He will go for one of the best games of the week. 27 fantasy points, 22 attempts, 177 yards. If you took away the 72-yard touchdown, he still would have averaged over 5 yards per carry. I believe the exact number was 5.7 yards per carry if you took away that touchdown. He was otherworldly. The Broncos defense, particularly the rush defense, is bad. It's horrendous, truthfully. And Breece Hall, now that we're finally seeing him unleashed, this is everything that you've been waiting for if you are a Breece Hall owner. Joel, talk to me. Are you feeling confident? I mean, is it finally
Yeah,
time
you
for
have to.
Breece Hall owners to embrace and rejoice?
Breece Hall, do you know on the season what he's averaging per carry?
Let me guess because I know he's had so limited touches.
He's
I'm
got
gonna I'm gonna
with 54 attempts so far.
I'm going to guess. I'm going to be egregious here. I'm going to guess 7.1.
7.2.
I'm him. Damn. Oh my God, bro. What?
7.2 yards per
What?
carry. He, I mean, listen. You hear Silas say like what was the word he used? Like the handcuffs are off. Whatever
Yeah,
verbiage he used.
yeah.
And you're like, all right, like yeah, I'm sure he'll get like 60% of snaps, maybe 15 touches. But the fact that he was out there, 100% workhorse role, he was the guy. First, second, third down did not matter. And beyond Brees Hall, Michael Carter is getting more snaps than Dalvin Cook now, as he should. Dalvin Cook is third on the depth chart in terms of attempts. I'm sure snaps. Michael Carter outproduced him too. But at
Yep.
least production, or excuse me, opportunity wise, Michael Carter did. And we're a couple weeks away, I think, before Izzy comes in and takes that spot, and Dalvin Cook's a healthy scratch. Because right now, Dalvin Cook is the least efficient running back in the league, and Robert Saleh can say all he wants about in practice the GPS is saying he's hitting 20 miles an hour, he's getting the legs under him. If he's not going to be able to produce, he's going to be out of the lineup, out of the team, an inactive player going forward. But Brees Hall, I mean, this is the guy that we saw last year. This was the guy that Jets trade up for in the second round, was on his way to win Offensive Rookie of the Year before he goes down to injury. So yeah, we know he has the talent. We know he has the athleticism. He's going to get the work to do it. He's going to be a guy that's going to get 75 to 80% of snaps going forward. I would like to see him more involved in the passing game, but right now the Jets passing game is just so limited, 26 attempts against Denver, that we're probably not going to see him do a whole lot. But in the same breath, he could take a screen past 50 yards. He could take,
For
what I mean?
sure.
Like any little design play for him in the pass or the run has an opportunity to go to the house. So just a really, really special talent that if you start him any week, he could be RB1.
The one big issue that, of course, Jets fans and all fans have had with Zach Wilson is that he really has struggled so far to just hit the check down, hit the easy play, hit the flat. And we've seen him do it a little bit so far to start this season. But if he can get that more on a consistent note, we can start to see the Jets offense start to move down the field a little bit more and more, and it'll allow for the big plays to open up. Now, I say that where you mentioned Brees Hall, you want to get him acclimated in the passing game. I agree. He's one of the most versatile running backs in the game. He had 3 targets. He brought in all 3 of those catches, albeit for only 17 yards, but he has the capabilities to be that type of workhorse. It's also where now we see the handcuffs being taken off. Is that now the time where that is implemented into the offense? Now,
Still only
stay
played
with
52% of snaps. Got 20 opportunities. And listen, Brees gets 20 opportunities. He could play 50% of snaps. It does not matter. But
agreed.
50% 50% of attempts tells me that these 20 opportunities, this might be on the low end, right? Of course, they're not going to go out and give him 30 carries every single game. I don't think they get that egregious, but 52% of snaps and RB3 on the week. I think there's still room to grow here.
Brees Hall, I said it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I love Garrett Wilson. I think he's an amazing player. The most talented offensive player you have is Brees Hall. He is
Nothing wrong with that.
extremely versatile. He's one of the fastest players in your offense. He's probably the fastest player in your offense. He's unbelievable.
I think he hit sorry to cut you off, but on that
It's fine.
70-yard touchdown, I believe that is the fastest ball carrier not on the Miami Dolphins all season. Like the
I
Dolphins
was
have
going
like
to
the first like
top
6.
5. Yeah, I was
But
going to
yeah,
say.
Brees is the next fastest after all those guys.
To talk about that, you saw Tyreek Hill hit the fastest time this season and got caught. He
Oh, I
hit
didn't
20.
realize
He hit,
that was the
yeah.
fastest.
He hit 22 miles an hour and got
That's
caught.
nice.
That is crazy. But to stay within the same game, to finally show some love to someone on the Denver side of the ball, Jaleel McLaughlin. Now I bring him up, running back 7 on the week, 9 rushes, 68 yards, had 4 targets, brought in 3 catches for 21 yards and a nice touchdown, honestly, where it kind of got tipped in the air. He was
Was
able
nice.
to stay with it, got into the end zone, got a little shifty. But I say this because when we talked about this time last week about the waiver wire additions, I said, hey, if Javonte is going to be out for some time and Russ continues to throw it to him out of the flat, which he's shown to do so, was not aware that he was going to be this efficient on the ground. He was elusive. He was fantastic against one of the better defenses in the National Football League. We're going to talk about it on the waiver wire additions later on in the show. Expect to hear his name. Javonte Williams, I love. You guys know that I'm a huge fan. I believe that he's got great talent. I fear that the injuries are catching up to him, and for the future, I'm unsure what is Javonte Williams. But I could tell you that Jaleel McLaughlin works great for this offense because Russ has shown a willingness to throw into the flat, hit the check down. Jaleel McLaughlin, where Samaje will get his, Jaleel McLaughlin will get his in this offense as well.
And
And
his
the last,
role should only expand. Like he's back-to-back weeks of
sure,
33% snaps, right? 7 attempts week 4 against Chicago, 9 attempts this past week against the Jets, 3 receptions in both games. So he's doing this, being super efficient on 10 opportunities against Chicago and what's this, 12 opportunities
yep,
against the Jets. He's showing, like, he's a rookie, right? First year. He's showing the coaching staff, he's showing Sean Payton that, listen, I could do this when Javonte's out, but Javonte's eventually going to come back in. Jaleel McLaughlin's going to have a role.
I agree. I mean, he looked great in the preseason. The kid made the roster. That was huge in its own right. And now he's putting it on display in the regular season. It's been excellent to see. Now, the last name we're going to mention with the studs, RB10 on the week. I mentioned him because you expect to hear somebody else on this team. But rookie Tajay Spears was able to put up 16 fantasy points, crack the top 10, 7 rushes, 34 yards, and a touchdown. A nice touchdown, albeit that too. And then had 6 targets, caught all 6 targets in PPR. You were absolutely loving Tajay, which I doubt a lot of you started him, of course. But 38 yards. Is Tajay one of those that we're going to be talking about on the waiver wire additions later, or you're just going to allow this to be a one-time thing? Keep this in your back pocket for potentially another week down the road that then your interest is piqued.
It still feels like you're probably chasing points if you pick him up. Still playing about 50% of snaps, only got 11 total opportunities and did get that 1 rushing touchdown. So, of course, you don't want to take away the player's best play. You take away the touchdown. But throughout the season, I mean, RB 50, 33, 54, 28, and as you mentioned, top 10 this week. So he's not someone I'm going out of my way. I'm not dropping 10, 15, 20 fab on him, but he's one of the top handcuffs in the NFL. If you have a
For
Derrick
sure.
Henry, I want to do everything I can to make sure Tajay Spears is on my roster. And it's screwed up, but if Derrick Henry or Tajay Spears go down to injury, the other one's just going to be better because they're both kind of holding each other back right now because Spears is doing just enough to make Henry. I mean, outside of a week or two, Henry has not been the same Derrick Henry we have seen in previous years. And Tajay Spears, we see that explosiveness, but Derrick Henry is still clearly ahead of him, clearly getting more opportunities than him. So, barring a touchdown or him being able to get 50, 60 receiving yards, which I mean, this past week was 35, and that was by far his highest of the season, it feels like you're still probably chasing points with him if you pick him up.
Now, before we get into the running back duds, let's take a break. If you guys are tuned in to the stream, one, we appreciate it. Two, if you could hit the like button below, that'd be much appreciated. Definitely helps us out. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. But now let's get into the running back duds. Have to mention Jonathan Taylor. We already spoke about it, 15% of snaps. We anticipate that this will ramp up week by week. We know that he is on a snap count earlier this season, but only 3 fantasy points, 6 attempts, 18 rushing yards. Let's just temper expectations, I guess. Understand that he is working his way back from injury. It's been some time since he's played some football. They did just pay him this big contract. So you anticipate that the usage will get to Jonathan Taylor's standards eventually. But in those situations where you drafted Jonathan Taylor before the news broke that he wasn't going to report to camp, or even still, you used the 7th, 8th rounder on a Jonathan Taylor, it wasn't the best performance that you wanted to see because it's Jonathan Taylor, name alone. You threw him into your lineup. I know that because I was one of those guys. He's too good
Me too.
to keep on your
Yep.
bench. So for this performance to happen, it's just one of those to keep in the back of your mind for next week and the week after that.
So, how are you viewing Jonathan Taylor? This next week, he's got Jacksonville, Cleveland, and the Saints the next 3 weeks. Not exactly the prettiest of matchups.
Not at all.
Um, so I guess, I mean, saying would you start him or not is kind of easy. Would you start like Jerome Ford over him, for example? I think he's got San Fran this week, so not a great matchup. But I guess what's your confidence in Jonathan Taylor? Like, is he going to be at 50% snap share next week? Is he going to get 10 opportunities? it's Jonathan Taylor, so you don't want him on your bench and he goes off for the 70-yard touchdown, but you also can't keep starting him if he's going to get 5 touches for the next 2 weeks.
It's extremely difficult to analyze right now just because off game one, where we did see him log full practices, did sign the big extension. You were expecting more than 15% snap count. There's no way you were expecting lower than, let's say, 30, 40. I get it. He's missed 4 games, but there was a lot trending into that direction of him getting a good workload. But it seemed as if Zach Moss had dominated so much that it kind of allowed
He played a
leeway
big part in it.
to allow
Yeah.
Jonathan Taylor to rest up, kind of just take it, step by step in his return process. But I feel like we'll have a better answer of that next week. I don't know if I can give the best, most concise answer right now. Maybe as we go into our next show on Thursday, whether we find out if he's limited in practice, if he's full go in these upcoming practices, that'll definitely allow me to feel more confident in my answer going forward. But right now, just for what we've seen with the Zach Moss situation, with the snap count percentage situation, again, full practice, there's just too much on both sides to allow me to feel confident in one answer. I know it's kind of a cop out, but I feel like that's just the only honest way to view it at this point in time. To
I
to
think it's
move
fair.
on, let's talk about another dud who's been one of the bigger duds this season. Honestly, a couple of these guys. Ramondre Stevenson, 2 fantasy points, 8 attempts, 24 yards. It was an ass kicking by the Saints. There wasn't much opportunity for Ramondre to have success here, but he's just been so disappointing this year. What do you do with Ramondre? Because he's not someone that you can drop. You're not dropping
Nope.
Ramondre
No, you can't.
Stevenson. That's irresponsible. But if you're trading him at this point, there's no lower value that Ramondre Stevenson can hit just because of how ineffective he's been so far this season.
He he really just feels like such a roster clogger right now.
For sure.
I have this tweet here from Dwayne McFarland. I think he works at PFF. Um, or excuse me, he works at Fantasy Life now. I think he used to work at PFF, but regardless.
Mhm.
At first I thought it was the Patriots like run blocking. Like I think the offensive line's so much worse, but at least per PFF, their run block grade last year was 56.7. This year it's 54.8. So slightly worse, but not this big drastic change. A lot of it's been on Ramondre. 10 plus yard carries, 14% last year, 3% this year. Average yards after contact, 3.8 last year, 1.8 this year. Missed tackles forced, 19% last year, 13 this year. Targets per route run, he's not getting as many looks, 26% last year, 14% this year. So it's a mix of opportunities in the pass game where that's where he was getting a lot of his work, especially in half point PPR and full point PPR leagues last season, that he hasn't been getting the same workload. But he also hasn't been the same player. He hasn't had that same type of explosiveness. He hasn't been able to not, and we know Ramondre is not a 40, 50 chunk yard guy, but he's a guy that could get 7, 10, 15, 20 yard chunks at a time. And he hasn't been doing it that this year. And he hasn't been able to, break through tackles. He hasn't been able to get around guys at the same rate he was doing last season. So while the New England situation is gross and it's ugly and the offensive line bad and Mac Jones got benched 2 weeks in a row, and we're going to talk about what to do with Bill Belichick tomorrow on Pick a Side, Ramondre Stevenson is partially at fault too, that he has not been the same player that we saw last year. Unfortunately, for fantasy, you have to bench him, I think. I'd rather start Jerome Ford probably. Maybe not this week going up against San Francisco, but he's someone that is just the ceiling is so low on this offense, and the floor all of a sudden also became so low because he's not getting the pass catching work. So if you're able to you can't trade him 1 for 1, but if you're able to package him, you're going to need a player better than Ramondre. If you could package a Ramondre and a Calvin Ridley to upgrade our running back or receiver to kind of tier up one, that's probably the best move. But at least for me, if someone offers me Ramondre Stevenson, I'm looking at that like a borderline waiver player. So he's not holding a ton of value right now.
It's fair enough, and I don't disagree at all. He, in 3 weeks in a row, has failed to get double-digit points in fantasy football. Simply not going to cut it for a running back that was going in the top 4, top 5 rounds. Uh, But let's move on. Let's go on to James Conner. He enters this conversation. He's been fantastic in fantasy football. Did leave this game with a concussion, I believe. Uh, I'm with concussions so far this season. The worry is it seems
You
as
miss a
if
week.
you're bound to miss a week,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So that's something to keep in mind. We will be talking about that later on the waiver wire editions.
He has a knee injury, actually, it looks like.
Who am I thinking of with
Maybe
the
he also had a concussion, but I'm seeing knee.
Another player that we're going to have on the duds is going to be Najee Harris. Continues to be
There we
one of the
go.
most inefficient running backs in the game. Are we grouping him in the same conversation as Ramondre Stevenson, except we're giving Najee Harris the benefit of the doubt that his run block unit is atrocious.
It's so bad. It's so bad. I mean, they're both just so underwhelming, right? It's so hard. This is the thing. If you are not a running back who could break off these huge runs, Brees Hall-esque, and listen, there's very few Brees Hall-like running backs in the
For
NFL.
sure.
If you're not on a top offense that's going to be able to get multiple red zone trips per game, per half, and you have opportunities to score touchdowns, you're going to be irrelevant. Najee Harris and the Steelers, one of the worst offenses in the league. And then you have Ramondre Stevenson and the Patriots, the other worst offense in the league. So
Yeah.
right now, these are two guys that are not going to be getting work in the red zone because their offense simply can't get there more than once, maybe twice per game, and they're not getting pass game work like they have in previous years. So I know we've been low on Najee Harris all year, and Ramondre, we've kind of been like, oh, maybe he'll come around. But at this point, I look at them very similar.
And to correct myself with James Conner, you're right. It is a knee injury. Allegedly will miss a little bit of time. Not ideal for someone who has been pretty fantasy relevant so far, especially for how late he was going. Did struggle against San Fran, but again, leaving early against Cincinnati did ruin his day when Cincinnati has been pretty forgiving against the run. But Najee Harris, it's tough sledding for owners of Najee, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. Real life and fantasy, I always say it's hard to separate. But this is the one time where both coincide. He's not great in fantasy football. In real life, his offensive line is terrible, and that is not going to aid his situation where he lacks explosiveness. He does not get the same pass work that he had gotten his rookie season with a Big Ben. So it's tough to give a vote of confidence to Najee going forward until this line's addressed. But we saw the Steelers offense kind of look decent down the stretch of the game. For the first 3 quarters, horrendous. But that last quarter, they actually put some things together. Last two names I want to talk about, Tony Pollard. It was an ass kicking. The script was not for Tony. He did fumble the football early in this game. That kind of did allow San Fran to put this one even more out of reach. But I'm expecting Tony to continue to be great. Has been one of the best
Absolutely.
fantasy running backs so far. And lastly, James Cook against the Jaguars, whose run defense has been good. I'll
Mm-hmm.
give him that. But -2 rush yards. Saving grace was that he was active in the pass game. Josh Allen and him do have that connection. Josh trusts him as his safety net. But -2 rush yards, his worst rushing performance of the season by far. We saw there be a committee of running backs usage where it seemed as if they just were scattered like five, five, five. Each of them got peppered with carries. I'm talking about Damian. I'm talking about Latavius. And of course, James. Is this something that you are worried about? Now, I'll tell you before you go, as a James Cook supporter, I have James Cook in a ton of leagues. I still feel confident. This wasn't a great matchup. London, overseas, you're going up against a solid run defense. It was still solid to see him get work in the passing game where he did not have it in the run game. Nobody really was effective in the run game, but they were still targeting him late in the game. They trust him as the third down back. I think it still allows me to have confidence with James moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, coming into this game, he was RB 29, 11, 18, 13. I mean, he was a top 15, top 20 top running back. And even in games where he struggled to run the ball, like week 1, 46 rushing yards, but 4 receptions. Week 4, only 29 rushing yards, but ended up having a 48-yard catch. So at least in the first 4 weeks, if the run game wasn't working, he was able to get it in the passing game. And even though this was his worst week of the season, it was also tied for his season high in snap percentage. He was at 62% of snaps. He's been around the 60% mark most of the season. Only last week he was down to 40%. So James Cook is never, or at least I don't think the Bills view James Cook as a guy that's going to be getting 75, 80% of snaps. I think they want to use Damian Harris, use Latavius Murray on some third down situations in the goal, on the goal line especially. I know they love using
Absolutely.
basically anyone not named James Cook, whether it's Josh Allen or one of the two other running backs. That's really the spot it hurts you the most. But James Cook, super explosive. He's going to get looks in the pass game. He's on a great offense, so I'm not overreacting this week.
Let's move to the wide receiver studs. The stud of the week, the number one finish in fantasy football. Finally, he has a Jamar Chase-esque day. 52 fantasy points, 15 receptions. That is a record for Cincinnati football. 192 yards, 3 touchdowns. Had the bomb play, had 19 targets. I mean, this was everything you've been waiting for, you've been expecting. It's only going to continue from here, especially if Joe Burrow's healthy. Jamar Chase is way too good. He's put himself in the conversation as one of the best receivers in the game. It was just a matter of time. He said it himself. I'm 7-Eleven. I'm always open. It's just a matter of getting me the rock.
Absolutely. Now he, after the terrible, awful start that Jamar Chase and the Bengals had, he's wide receiver 6 on the year. So, a nice 52 an hour league we play with some bonuses. It's going to put him right in the conversation, at least end of the year, that those first couple of weeks when he was wide receiver 47 and 67, no one's going to remember that. Wide receiver 10, 27, and wide receiver 3 this past week. 15 targets, 9 targets, 19 targets. It's Jamar Chase. He's going to get the usage. It was a matter of time.
And just for everyone wondering, if you're wondering which standard I'm going by in terms of fantasy points per game, I'm just going strictly off CBS Sports, just so we keep it pretty generic for everyone. Number 2, DJ Moore. Of course, we spoke about that. One of the best games, of course, where you expected this guy to be number 1 on the week. Jamar Chase just goes and has himself a game. One of the names I want to mention, of course, Tyreek's going to be Tyreek. Adam Thielen, wide receiver 4 on the week, 27 fantasy points, 11 catches, 107 yards and a touchdown, 13 targets. Is he a must start every single week? I already shared the tweet with you. I have to read it. I have to. In 4 weeks, the last 4 weeks, Adam Thielen, 20.4 fantasy points, 31.5 fantasy points, 15.2 fantasy points, 27.7 fantasy points. This guy is must start. It doesn't matter if it's Bryce Young, if it's going to be Andy Dalton. This is the guy they're looking for because he's the only reliable option. He's the only one that is getting open on a relatively consistent basis. Their first read is Adam Thielen. For him to continue to be as effective as he is, I wish I was as proactive as I've been on this show defending Adam Thielen in terms of my leagues of actively trying to get Adam Thielen. I didn't think that this level of play was so sustainable, but 4 weeks in a row, he's been one of the best guys in fantasy.
And he has Miami this upcoming week. So keep starting him. He's in my lineup at least for one more week. They got the bye, Houston, Indy, Chicago. I mean, the looks he's getting, 9 targets, 14 targets, 8 targets, 13 targets. That's high end. That's wide receiver 1 numbers. Let's not cut it any other way. That's wide receiver 1 type usage. So regardless of what, I know you've been preaching up Thielen a little bit, definitely more than me. I'm not someone who's high and I'm Thielen at all, but if he's going to get these looks, you got to start him. If he's going to get 7 receptions as a floor, that means the floor is probably going to be 70 yards. And the ceiling, like we've seen, has been 145 yards week 3, 100 plus yards this past week. So Adam Thielen, 33 years old, still getting it done.
The dude's a legend. Now I saw John over here in the chat, and he said, I'm on my hands and knees just begging for George Pickens content. So let's show George Pickens some love. He had himself an unbelievable ball game. Had the game-winning touchdown against the Ravens. Clutch. I mean, he looked everything of what he was anticipated to be this season. John had a tweet so far this season where it's not fair to Garrett Wilson. George Pickens has more yards than everyone of that draft class so far going into this season, more than Olave, more than Garrett Wilson. He was phenomenal. 6 catches, 130 yards. Beautiful. This is the most beautiful part, 10 targets. And an offense that has not been prolific whatsoever. He's getting the most opportunities by far. Of course, I already mentioned the touchdown. Is this the only guy that we can trust on the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Deontay, if I'm remembering correctly, got hurt after week 1.
Yep.
Pittsburgh does have a bye week 6, so assuming you get 4 weeks off for the IR, assuming Deontay is good to go, there's a decent chance he plays week 7. Now, I don't think in at least that 1 week that stopped me from playing George Pickens, but he's still kind of boomer bust, right? He's at least after week 1 when Deontay went out, wide receiver 9, but then wide receiver 39, wide receiver 72, and wide receiver 4 last week. So he's very much in that he's not going to get a ton of receptions. Like 10 targets was super promising, but 4 receptions, 3 receptions, 6 receptions. He is just so explosive and can take, like, whether it's a slant like we saw against Cleveland or go route like we saw this past week against Baltimore. He is so explosive that he doesn't need the Adam Thielen 10, 14 targets per game to be efficient. But you do, I know we're getting hype about Pickens. This is a guy that went to Georgia, was very highly touted, 2nd round pick. We're getting very excited about him, but we still have to remember this is, at least for fantasy, a boomer bust receiver. He has not shown to be week in, week out, consistent. You could rely on him. I think that's more to do with Matt Canada, Kenny Pickett, and this offense, because George Pickens has all the talent in the world. It's just this offense has some really, really low lows.
Now, the last 2 guys we're going to talk about is definitely going to be a topic of discussion for at least until one of these guys gets acclimated within the offense. And that's going to be Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. There's no way around it. Puka Nacua is amazing. It does not matter. Cooper Kupp was only going to aid Puka because the attention's going to be on Cooper. He is one of the best in the game. He still has one of the best. He has the best wide receiver season of all time, and he didn't skip a beat. 8 catches, 118 yards. That is going to be, that is the most Cooper Kupp stat line I've ever seen, honestly. But Puka on top of it, I gave my vote of confidence. I believe very firmly that we're not going to see that much of a drop off. 7 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, to still be a top 10 receiver when Cooper Kupp has the statistics that he did put forth this weekend, Eagles secondary is not the best. I've been very, very consistent on that. But Puka is going to be one of the more trustworthy options still. It does not matter that Cooper Kupp is in the lineup, but Cooper is still that guy. He is unbelievable. It's just a matter of him staying on the field. The game's better with Cooper Kupp. It is. But for these two together to be in the same offense, still saw Tutu Atwell get into the end zone. Matthew Stafford is going to spread the love. He's throwing to whoever is open. And the good thing about this offense is that Cooper and Puka are both getting open a lot.
And we don't even have to worry about it's going to take Kupp a couple weeks. He played 95% of snaps. Like Puka did this with Cooper Kupp playing his normal Cooper Kupp role, normal snaps, normal targets. There was nothing weird, didn't come out back in. This is the offense. This is what it's going to look like. Sean McVay has shown with Jared Goff, he can support Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp in the same offense. Matt Stafford, who's a more talented version of Jared Goff, can support Puka and Cooper Kupp, and hell, might be able to support Tutu Atwell as well. So both of these guys are top 10 receivers going forward. I think Cooper Kupp season end will end up finishing higher than Puka. He's just a more talented guy. He's one of the best receivers in the league, but Puka is still should be looked at as a top 10 receiver for fantasy.
And I say this to my Puka owners. I pray you did not get scared. I pray you did not trade him last week just with the rumblings of Cooper Kupp going forward. And do not trade him now. Unless you're getting something drastic. Unless you're getting an A.J. Brown, unless you're getting like a Stephon,
Chase,
like a
Jettis,
very
the
obvious.
first round picks that were like Tyreek Hill, Jettas, Chase, AJ Brown, would you rather have CeeDee Lamb or Puka?
As someone who has both, I am way more happy with Puka than I am with CeeDee Lamb because I know his quarterback is going to be consistent in terms of pushing the ball downfield and feeding the top guys. Stafford's one of the, if you are a fan of fantasy football, you need to love Matthew Stafford because all he does is aid receivers. That's all he's done his entire career.
Yeah, there's like out of the, I think the only ones we didn't name, I would still take Tay over him. I'd probably still take Keenan Allen over him.
For sure.
Maybe Amon Ra probably still.
For sure.
Maybe. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, like I said, top 10 receiver, he should be valued as that. If you're not getting one of those receivers we mentioned, just keep him.
All right, now we're on to the wide receiver duds. Unfortunately, you knew that this name would be here. Courtland Sutton, only one catch, 13 yards. He's been a guy that's been able to get into the end zone. That's been one positive to Courtland so far this season, but just lacks explosiveness, lacks ability to separate. And in a matchup against Sauce Gardner, he got put in his place. He did not have a great catch. And this is a game where DJ Reed didn't even play.
Bryce
I
Hall
mean,
played a great game.
he did. I'll give him his credit. He absolutely did put together a great performance. You guys played great as a whole. I mean, Broncos receivers struggled all game long getting open, and Courtland Sutton was most definitely one of them. Next name I wanted to list, Jameson Williams. I get it. First game back from suspension. Was able to what? I think it was one catch. Was not involved in this offense whatsoever. We saw, of course, where Josh Reynolds continues to outsnap him, outperform him drastically. Josh Reynolds is a must start every single week. One of the better flex plays that there are right now. You saw Khalif Raymond outsnap him. Marvin Jones getting work in front of him. It's tough sledding for Jameson Williams. And I don't know if it's because his play style just does not fit this offense. I don't know if it's because Goff and his arm is too inconsistent in terms of deep shots down the field, but it's been very bizarre and unfortunate if you are a believer in Jameson Williams, where you know he is a big play waiting to happen. It's just when is it going to happen, if
The
at
bright
all?
side is the bright side, he's played 47% of snaps, and that's basically double his season high of last year.
Yep.
The bad side is he got 3 targets, 2 receptions for 2 yards.
Yeah.
And Dan Campbell doesn't strike me as the type of guy that just because you were a first round pick, you're going to go out there and get all the looks. Like Dan Campbell's the type of guy that if Josh Reynolds is playing better, he's going to play more. If Khalif Raymond's playing better, he's going to be on the field more. So Jameson Williams has all of the talent in the world. He could be one of the most explosive receivers. He could be the most explosive receiver in the NFL. It's just I really think it's a matter of in practice, he has to show it every single week to Dan Campbell. He has to show a willingness to be able to block and do the little things before he's going to be able to get design plays called up for him in the game.
I just think that his skill set, it's not meant, his body type is not meant to be this great blocker, this effective blocker. You need to be able to do it in the National Football League. Doesn't matter who you are. But you should be making plays specifically to get him out in space. You use too high of a draft pick to at least not try and get him involved in this offense. But I feel like that's more so about real football as opposed to fantasy football. I just feel as if he's too explosive. I see the potential that can be Jameson Williams in fantasy football. I'm talking to my guys over in dynasty leagues that really invested high draft picks in your rookie draft in him. But he's been disappointing so far, and it's been unfortunate. But I'm holding out hope. I still think the talent's too much. He's still too great of a prospect to lose out hope. His ceiling's too high, I should say.
Would you trade a random 2024 first for Jameson Williams?
No, I wouldn't.
I'd probably
Brock Bowers, God forbid that pick turns into a Brock Bowers. If it's a 2-quarterback league, Caleb.
If it's 2-quarterback league, yeah, there's no way.
You know what I mean? So much talent, that there's no way I would do that. God forbid that you miss out on the chance on a Marvin. Like, you have to tell me it's 10. If it's pick 10, okay, I maybe, but even still, I don't love it. I mean, he's shown you nothing until this point. Last name I want to mention on the duds for the wide receiver, it's got to be Smitty. Only one catch, did see 5 targets, but only had that one catch for 6 yards. Finished as the wide receiver 99 this week. Last week, he saw a bunch of targets, 9 targets, 7 catches for 78 yards. You loved it, but the week before that against Tampa Bay, finished as wide receiver 73, only brought in 4 balls for 28 yards. Is Smitty, did we count our eggs before they
A
hatched
little
on
bit,
Smitty?
a little bit. I did, at least, because I think more than anything, I was pissed off that I drafted AJ Brown top of the second. The first 2 weeks, Smitty's out producing him. It is a little, and I feel this way about Jalen Waddle too. That different situations, because Miami's pass offense has been elite since week one. So maybe a little bit more concerned with Waddle, that Miami's offense has been great. It's been 5 weeks, and Waddle was fine this past week. He was a top 20 receiver, got in the end zone, but we haven't seen consistency. We haven't seen back-to-back top 10, top 15 finishes that we were expecting out of the super explosive player and a super explosive offense. But getting back to Smitty, it's a bit concerning that it feels like the Eagles are hitting their stride in the passing game these past 2 weeks, especially against the Rams. I think this was Jalen Hurts' best performance yet. And you saw Dallas Goedert get involved. You saw A.J. Brown have another great game. Of course, Swift is going to get his work. So it is a bit concerning that the first couple of weeks when the offense was struggling, at least the pass offense, Smitty was getting all that work. A.J. Brown was forgotten. And now that the pass offense is kind of, laying up again, it's kind of catching fire. AJ Brown's doing everything, and Smitty's more or less been, shunned from the offense. He's not getting the looks, not getting the targets needed. You still have to start him. This offense is too good. Hurts is too good. Smitty as a talent is too good that he needs to be terrible for probably 4 or 5 straight weeks. And it hurts to see that constant 2, 3, 4, 5 points in your starting lineup. But you can't sit someone as good as Smitty because you probably don't have a better option on your bench.
This is the first week we saw Dallas Goedert be fantastic. It was the first
Yeah,
time
he was
that he
great.
was really incorporated into the offense. And I think that definitely caught a lot of Smitty owners by surprise, that the first week against a solid matchup against the Rams, you were expecting Smitty to have a solid performance. One catch, no way in hell you could have convinced me that would have been the line for Smitty this weekend. But of course, I'm with you. You have to send him out there with confidence. The offense is too explosive. Jalen Hurts right now, it seems as if he's hidden his stride as a player, not only just in fantasy, where right now he's the number 2 quarterback in fantasy. He's been excellent. But we saw it last week as a passer. This week also getting it going as a passer. The offense is finally starting to get it together on both sides, not just as a rush offense, but as a pass offense. I think you need to continue to have that faith in Smitty, because he's shown it already that he can be a top 10, top 11 fantasy finish in this offense. Now, we're going to wrap up the show with tight ends. Of course, we're going to get to the waiver wire ads as well. But this is going to be quick, because this is finally the first week that we saw the best of the best tight ends show out and finish at the top of the standings. You had George Kittle have 3 touchdowns. He was your tight end 1. You had Dallas Goedert. Finally, all Dallas Goedert owners were begging for this. 8 catches, 117 yards on 9 targets, and a touchdown. This was everything that you've been waiting for. If you're a Goddard owner, you knew that Goddard's talented. It was inevitable. It was surprising that he had been as stagnant as he has been. But if I'm the Eagles, I make it a point of emphasis to continue to get him involved in this offense. You can't make yourself so obvious that we're only throwing it to Smitty, we're only throwing it to AJ. When you get Dallas involved in the pass game, you become virtually impossible to defend.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you mentioned him yet. You didn't, but Mark Andrews should have had a bigger game than he did, because he dropped a touchdown in the end zone. It's funny because Travis Kelce has kind of disappointed, but then you go and look at his numbers. You're like, oh, he's been great every week,
He's
double digits
Travis
every week.
Kelce. Facts.
We haven't had that big blow up game from Kelce yet, but Kittle, I think, is more or less going to be, kind of the boomer bust player. He did this last year where he had a game where he drops 40 and then has 3 games dropping less than 5 points. It's kind of who Kittle is at this point.
But you continued to see, of course, you mentioned it, Kelce, Sammy Laporte. I mean,
Yep.
the guy is a superstar in the making. We're
Through
already
5 games, he's averaged the most yards per game out of any tight end in NFL history.
I think we're already talking about a top 5 tight end in the league. Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle. I'll give you
Hawk,
Hawkinson
Waller, yeah,
and 5. Give me Laporta. Waller has no business being in this conversation. I don't
Goddard.
care. I guess I should respect him. I should respect Goddard, but Laporta has been a
Been
star
amazing.
to start
Yes,
his career. Nothing short of a star. I'm sorry, I'm reading the comment, and it really caught me off guard. Uh, but Laporta's going to continue to be one of the best tight ends in the league. He just continues to score touchdowns. But you have to continue to feel confident about him. Finally, Kyle Pitts has some life. 7
there we go.
catches for 87 yards, no touchdown, but 11 targets. Oh, I mean, is it
There we
about
go.
that time? Is it Kyle
Uh,
Pitts' time? Are we done having him be our sit of the week? Did he tune in and realize it's personal?
it's kind of funny because if you look at his like route tree, everything is him going to the left. So I'm thinking that knee. I don't remember which knee it was, right or left, but regardless, it feels like he's most comfortable cutting to the left and maybe cutting to the right or back out. Decelerating is not really his thing. Um, I still don't think Pitts is 100% healthy. This is probably the best he's looked. So I don't feel ultra confident starting him going forward. One name I know we skip by because so far, this kind of his career, Logan Thomas, has been
Yeah.
more of an afterthought. But Logan Thomas, he might be available in your leagues. He's only rostered in 20% of leagues. Week 1, he got hurt. Week 2, he got hurt. Week 1, though, 8 targets. Week 2, got injured. Week 3, he missed. Week 4, coming off the concussion, wasn't great. But Week 5 against Chicago, 11 targets, 9 receptions, 77 yards. If you need a tight end, he is probably number 1 on my list in terms of waiver wire additions that you could go up and probably pick up off your waiver wire. But Kyle Pitts, I'm not 100% bought in yet.
Yeah, I do not blame you. The guy is pretty mid. Last name I want to mention, Dalton Schultz. Another week, gets into the end zone. We saw him get his most receptions on the season so far. Did have 7 receptions, 465 yards. I love this because this is what I was anticipating coming into the season. You paid him that money. It was a 1-year contract. Dalton Schultz was on a prove a year, essentially. And with CJ Stroud being as great as he has been so far in the season, I'm feeling confident if I'm a Dalton Schultz owner every single week, this can be my guy that can be productive. Now, for the duds, there's only really one that I want to highlight. It's Hunter Henry. And I only say that because early in the season, he was one of the best tight ends in fantasy football. 2 weeks in a row, he was one of the league leaders in receiving yards and touchdowns. So for it to be another week of 0, I mean, it's hard to trust anyone in this Patriots offense. And I mean, including Ramondre Stevenson in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hawkinson was another one who didn't have a great game. He got banged up. I'm not sure
Mhm.
exactly how much he ended up playing, but that was another one who, it looked like it was a good matchup, but ended up not going up against the Chiefs. Nick Bolton was out too, so they're down one of their best coverage linebacker probably, but ended up only playing maybe a half. I don't remember seeing him out there in the second half, but he hasn't been great these last few weeks. He was great weeks 2 and 3, but weeks 4 and 5 has been pretty disappointing for Hawkinson.
Let's get into our waiver wire additions. Now, we talked about James Conner potentially missing some time. Amari DeMercado, excuse me.
Yep.
He
Cardinals running back.
logged in 77% of snaps, did finish with 12 fantasy points, got into the end zone, was pretty efficient, honestly, averaged 4.5 a carry, only 10 attempts. But this is one of those guys that if James Conner's going to miss some time, understanding that the Cardinals rush offense is the highlight of this offense, I could be comfortable, especially with this running back landscape, spending a $15, 20%, I should say, just because of how high potent, or let me not say high potent, but how effective this Cardinals rush offense has been so far this season.
The only name to look out for is Keontae Ingram, who has missed the
Yep.
last 2 weeks with a neck injury. Coming into the year, he was probably the de facto backup handcuffed to James Conner. Um, I think what he showed though, at least the other Cardinals running back, I not know how to pronounce his name, but
DeMarcado.
rookie Demercado, rookie wasn't high, I don't know if he was drafted at all actually. Not someone that was in my draft process when we were scouting guys, but he showed that he's more than capable. So even if Ingram comes back, it wouldn't surprise me if Demercado was the one to get the first crack at the job. But if Ingram is out, then the ceiling obviously raises because he should be really the only person in that backfield. Like you said, 77% of snaps. And that was once Connor went out. So, he obviously didn't play that first quarter or however much before James Conner ended up getting hurt. So he's someone that I'm looking at, like right with you, 15 to 20%. If you really need a running back start, because it doesn't sound like James Conner is going to miss a lot of time.
Uh, we spoke about it earlier that this guy would get mentioned, Jaleel McLaughlin. People listen, 55% rostered, but still available in a ton of leagues. He's definitely one of those with the way that the Broncos offense has been running, excuse me. I'm leaning around that 10%. I feel comfortable, especially with this running back landscape, adding throwing 10% on a Jaleel just because he's active in the pass game as well. And in PPR, that is extremely, extremely effective for me.
Absolutely. He's shown to be explosive. He doesn't need 15, 20 touches, almost Devon Chan light, that he could average 10 yards a touch. He's gotten the end zone back-to-back weeks. It's obvious Russ and Sean Payton trust him in the passing game too. So there's a chance he got picked up last week. But if you have to pick him up this week, you probably need to go a little bit heavier because everyone was hesitant last week.
For
Javonte may
sure.
play, he may not. He's this rookie. We haven't really seen him outside of 1 week, but back-to-back weeks, if you really want him, you're probably going to have to pay up a bit more than if you would have snagged him last week.
Another name we already talked about, Tajay Spears, rostered in 37% of leagues. If you are a Derrick Henry owner, like Joel already mentioned, you better make it a priority to bring Tajay onto your team. He's been factored into this offense a lot more than what was anticipated into with his rookie season. The matchups may not be great. Does have Baltimore, does have a bye, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, but I just think with the sheer opportunity that could be, God forbid, something happens with a Derrick Henry or vice versa, you just want that handcuff if that's the case. Now, last I want to talk about with the running backs, with Khalil Herbert potentially missing some decent time, it's going to be between Donta Foreman and a Roschon Johnson. Now, Roschon Johnson's going to be rostered in more leagues than a Donta Foreman, but going forward, are you feeling more confident in Roschon or Donta just for the fact of we've seen Foreman when he has opportunity last season with Carolina? He was pretty effective. Are you anticipating that it's going to be a split between these two, or is it strictly going to be Roschon? Because I feel pretty safe with also Roschon being injured. Also, that Donta is
That
the guy that I'm leaning.
That's what I was going to bring up. Roschon's dealing with concussion. He did suffer it on Thursday, so we've seen all season, which we talked to earlier in the year. If you get hurt, or excuse me, early in the episode, if you get hurt with a concussion on Sunday, you miss the next game. We haven't really seen someone have a concussion Thursday and see what happens Sunday. So if Roschon is playing, he's active, I think he's the guy. I'm under the belief that even if Khalil Herbert never got hurt, Roschon eventually would have taken over this job. I mean, they gave Deontay Foreman a vet minimum contract. They drafted Roschon Johnson in the 4th round. They want him to be the guy eventually. So, like you said, he's probably not available. But if he is, I'm going hard after him because Khalil Herbert's in with the high ankle sprain. We just saw Saquon miss his 3rd game, and Saquon is 10 times the athlete, probably covering at 5 times the speed that Khalil Herbert will. There's a chance he gets placed on IR. There's a decent chance he misses 3, 4, maybe even more games. So even if Roschon just misses this one game, 2 weeks from now, he'll be the starting back, and he has the talent to be very special. I think top 20, top running back if Khalil is out.
Donta Foreman has been a healthy scratch 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah, that's also a terrible sign.
Just for opportunity alone with both of these guys, Khalil and Roschon being out, he's worth the play, especially if you're desperate. I believe they're going up against Minnesota I'll double check that real quick to make sure. Yeah, they're going up against Minnesota this upcoming week. Not the worst play, but you could probably get Donta for like $1, $2. You could get him pretty cheap if you are desperate. Now, wide receivers, nothing too crazy as of right now. If Elijah Moore's available in your league, go out and potentially add him. The schedule is pretty solid. San Francisco, not a great matchup, but Indianapolis been super lenient. Seattle's been super lenient. Arizona, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Denver. The schedule is fantastic. It's just a matter of consistency. Elijah Moore has not been great. Is the schedule one of those that you're trying to make Elijah Moore a priority or not so much?
I want to. I want Elijah Moore to be a thing so bad.
I got it,
He
man.
just hasn't right now. The other name I am looking at, one Curtis Samuel is available. He's owned in 28% of leagues, and these last 2 weeks, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 6 receptions, gone over 50 yards, and both has a touchdown. He probably is flex worthy, but the other name that's probably even less rostered, about the same 27%, is Josh Downs.
Yep.
Josh Downs, week 3 with Gardner Minshew, 12 targets. This past week, Minshew came in around halftime, second quarter, 6 receptions, 97 yards. Josh Downs is a big play type receiver, third round pick. He's someone that the Colts are prioritizing, trying to develop. Him and Minshew obviously have some sort of connection. He's probably not someone you feel comfortable starting right away, but it sounds like Richardson's going to be missing a minimum of a month. So if Josh Downs is able to, continue to build that relationship with Minshew, he could be someone that's flex worthy down the line.
Now, last receiver I want to mention, Rashee Rice. Is he one of those that we saw him get into the end zone? It seems as if of the crapshoot that is this Kansas City wide receiving core, he's not playing that many snaps, but he's been effective with his touches on 5 targets, 33 yards, and on 4 catches. But he did have that touchdown. I don't know if I love anything about the receiving core that is Kansas City, but is the fact that Mahomes feels comfortable enough to target him in the red zone area, does it make you intrigued at all to bring him in? I mean, it's not like people already don't have him on his radar. He's rostered in over 40% of leagues, but
Mm.
I don't know if I trust the wide receiver position for Kansas City right now enough to want to spend the money to bring him on my squad.
Yeah, and that 48%, even that 28% we're talking about Downs, that's probably a ton of dynasty leagues because I
For
can't
sure.
imagine a lot of redraft leagues. 50% of people have Rashee Rice. Maybe when they drafted him week 1, but after that, there was probably a decent chance you dropped him after he was wide receiver 28, wide receiver 90. Um, and if you look at the advanced numbers, yards per target, yards per route run, I'm sure Rashee Rice is off the charts being doing so well because like you mentioned, he's playing 30%, 40 up to 50% week 3.
Yep.
He's not playing a ton of snaps, but he's getting a good amount of looks for the snaps he is playing. I think I need to see him more as a full-time player. I mean, we're coming off a week that he just played 30% of snaps. I can't take that risk of if he doesn't get a touchdown, he's wide receiver 60 or wide receiver 70, and I just screwed myself. I would
Mhm.
like someone who's more involved in the offense, even though long-term play, if you have a roster spot to burn at least for a week or two, or for example, if you have someone, we mentioned this on the last show, um, say on Saturday or Sunday, you can move one of your players to IR and pick up somebody else.
Yep.
Pick up these guys like Rashee Rice or Josh Downs or one of these guys that could pop at any moment and can become a full-time player and fantasy relevant down the line. But I think at least for Tuesday waivers where you want to go out and get a Jaleel McLaughlin or DiMarcino, Jesus, I gotta remember, I gotta learn that guy's name.
Mhm.
Those would be the guys I'm prioritizing over Rashee Rice.
DeMarcado.
DiMarcado,
There you go. Yeah. Uh,
Italian.
and and also last one, I don't know. Last one I mentioned, eh, just because I'm looking at the percentage of roster, he's only rostered in 53% of leagues. Josh Reynolds. Make sure you go and you get this guy.
Absolutely.
He is one of the stronger plays. I would spend 15% on a Josh Reynolds just because of how great this Detroit Lions offense is. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Fantasy Reaction. We say this every single week. We go live Monday night. We go live Thursday night every single week. Mondays, we do studs and duds, waiver wire editions. Thursdays, we do starts and sits. We answer your start and sits questions. If you guys have any starting six questions for this upcoming week, drop them in the comment section below. If you've made it this far, 1, we appreciate you. 2, like the stream. It definitely benefits us. And also, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. Shout out also to the guy who said I look like Owen Wilson. I appreciate that. But again, that's going to do it from us. And we will see you guys next time.